Okay, let's see if we could pick up where we left off and show you how we can improve our experience. So I've already created a script here and I'm going to show you it running and see what I got in here. So you'll notice that now I have a slightly different prompt just to kind of illustrate that this is a new container instance. And as before, I have an environment that I could play with. But I want to show a key difference is if I do something and make a new instance, that each time I get my own file system to mess with, right? So in this case, the original root FS is stays intact. So I want to show you how this was done. So if we go through the container script, it essentially looks something like this, where I'm expecting to be passed a root file system to work with. So we save that. And then I will create a random ID reading from the urandom device and then just kind of trimming it and just taking the first 10 characters just so I get a random ID. And then I will prepare a new file system by making in the temp directory that random ID and then an upper directory, work directory, and overlay directory. And then I will use the mount command to essentially create an overlay file system. And it has a couple of parameters, the lower directory, the upper directory, and a working directory. And in short, what these different directories do is it creates a way for you to merge two different file systems together. So that way you can kind of have your original one, which is our lower directory, and have the ability to can add new content to it and potentially delete things from it without it affecting the root file system. And what the overlay file system will do for you is it will create a unified interface for you that will be transparent to you as you use it. And this will be on this overlay directory. So it kind of does all this hard work behind the scenes to essentially create a file system that is reusing another directory. There's actually some space benefits to this because you're not having to copy the same thing over and over again. You could just refer to that original directory. Okay, so as before, we used a change root, and but this time instead of pointing to root fs, we'll point to this overlay directory, and then we'll run the same busybox install command so they have all the symlinks. And then here's where we actually start the terminal. So we set the prompt to have the nonce, then change root, and again using the overlay directory, and then we start a shell, right? And so that's created the experience that you saw, um, which was pretty cool. But I wanted to show you a little bit more. So if we go back to this container, um, remember where I was showing you the proc file system not quite working? So I could tweak this script. If I go down and uncomment these two things, where I will additionally create a proc directory, which is basically mounting the proc file system. Okay, and if I add that step when I create the directory, you'll see I also have this proc directory. And this basically contains, kind of all the stuff that you need for the kernel to be able to get information about, what CPU is running, what processes are running, etc. And so, for example, if I use the top command, this works now, which is pretty cool. But I do want to show you something. We'll see if this works. So you see this process here for SSHD, that would be basically the SSH server that's running on the system, right? Now, if I were to kill that, what do you think will happen? Nothing. Okay, but let's try killing this one. How about this one? All right, well, I killed my own container. Okay, so sort of what you could see there is I had kind of more privilege than I needed in the sense of I can kind of see other things going on. And, maybe this is more robust. It was able to restart those processes. I'm not sure. But if you're thinking about this, if I had multiple containers running, I wouldn't want to be able to just kill some other random person's container running on the system, right? But it looks like I would be able to do that um, based on what we just saw. And the point here is we have done something pretty cool with just a couple lines of bash script. We've mostly replicated something that like you would see in Docker, where you can run a new process. It has its own file system and it's doing its own thing, but it isn't perfect, right? We still can potentially access other resources that we shouldn't. Um, the way that all this information is packaged up, it may not be ideal. So, for example, if we had multiple root file systems, that's all going to still be on disk, and I wouldn't have a common way of sharing those things, right? So, if there was a better way to build up layers, for example, that would be pretty cool. I also don't really have a good experience for building up this file system, right? So I had to manually make the directories and then grab random binaries using wget, etc. It would be nice if there was some sort of process for building up the um, the root file system using things that I'm more familiar with. Um, and so basically, you could see that we created something that is pretty powerful and actually would do a reasonably good job, but doesn't fully meet our criteria for being fully efficient and isolated. So the next step that we'll look at is see how that Docker helps solve some of these problems.